I mean, I think when we think about the application, not everything works in a silo. So yes, women do generally oxidize more fat than men, but a lot of things influence that. And when we look at sport performance, it's not just fat oxidation that influences performance. Think about, I mean, really the biggest difference is testosterone. Testosterone still impacts muscle and performance indirectly, even in those long distance events. I was curious about this too. That's not an area that I study directly, but I think when you look at the very, very long distances, so like, the example I always come up with is swimming of the English Channel. Like really when we're taking days, that's when women start to outperform men. But you're right. Like when we look at all the records, men are still outperforming women. And I think there's a number of things that impact that. You can't just look at fat oxidation. When we talk a little bit more practically, the other thing I see a lot is, although like at rest here and during exercise as a female, I should be burning more fat. But if I eat a boatload of carbohydrates all the time, that impacts that, then I am less efficient, or what we call metabolically inflexible. And so we see a lot of that with our women too, that they aren't actually burning more fat based on what they eat on a regular basis.
So explain to the audience who may not know the ins and outs of the science or the physiology, how women and men differ in terms of fat oxidation, also carbohydrate oxidation, and how that impacts what they eat, let's say, post-workout or even during training and or a race.
Gosh, that is a loaded question, Joey. But when we look at theoretically, if we start at, I know, right? If we start at rest, we all burn fat as our primary fuel source. So with no exercise, women should burn a little bit more, but obviously body size impacts that. And then when we think about exercise, as we transition into kind of low, moderate to high intensity, the best way to think about it as low intensity exercise, we all burn a larger proportion of fat than we do carbohydrate. But theoretically, women might burn a little bit more fat or utilize more fat. Moderate intensity exercise, a mix of both. And then high intensity exercise, we should all be relying on carbohydrate. And so there's that transition that's impacted by intensity and duration that most of us know. And so the biggest differences that I would describe between males and females is that we because we have higher body fat stores, because of estrogen, we are able to and should be able to utilize a bit more fat as we transition into high intensity exercise. But like I said, that's not always the case based on what I eat all of the time. And so then how does that impact exercise and nutrient timing? Well, theoretically, I think that's more impacted by the menstrual cycle, or like right now, I wouldn't say I would change my nutrition recommendations that much differently for males and females. One thing I often talk about more is if I have a female that is more metabolically inflexible, meaning they're burning more carbohydrate than the fat than they should, that means they're going to fatigue faster. They're going to deplete muscle glycogen, run out of those carbohydrate stores. So for them, what I would do is actually lower their carb to protein intake and basically slightly reduce carbohydrates, increase protein, which then helps them become more metabolically flexible and essentially prevent muscle glycogen depletion.